My turn now. I'll talk about the summer schools we organized in the framework of the PACITA project, so-called user summer schools. My talk will be structured around this, so an introduction to the summer schools, reiterate the objectives, talk to you a bit about the recruitment process, the advertising, preparation, participant selection, a little analysis about the expectations of the applicants and the participants, explain to you the format of the summer school, some of the observations, lessons from the evaluation, and some broader considerations about teaching and learning TA. So the summer schools were part of a bigger work package that was called Training TA, where the practitioner training were also part of. And from the outset we had to differentiate the two tasks actually. I'll come back to it in terms of the depth of the training and the users that are targeted. And we said, okay, if we want to exemplify TA, we need to address grand challenges, and because they call for new modes of interaction and exchange. So we made a survey among all the PACITA partners, especially the so-called non-PTA partners. You're probably familiar with this term now. What is the most interesting, most salient issue in their country? So for the summer school in Liège in 2012, we came up with renewable energy systems as a topic that is likely to attract a lot of people. And in Cork, Ireland, 2014, we chose to rely on an ongoing example project of PACITA about aging and telecare. The objectives are to train users of PTA that are, of course, policymakers, but also engineers, people from the scientific and the technology community, civil society organizations, industry, media, communication. Special focus was given to so-called non-PTA countries or emerging TA countries. This was one of the reasons why those summer schools were actually organized in Belgium and in Ireland. Focus was given to professionals that want to introduce TA in their organization or in their country, as well as potential TA users. The idea was to raise awareness and introduce TA to a broader audience to strengthen the support base, but also for the lecturers and, as I would say, the more experienced partners, there was a mutual learning dimension to it by being faced with the diversity of TA throughout Europe and also being confronted to the actual demand side of TA. Just very briefly, how we did it. We advertised the event through posters, mailing lists, personal contacts and networks. We received motivation letters from applicants, from 45 to 54 applicants. We selected around 35 each time. And you see that we more or less succeeded in attracting mainly people from non-PTA countries that were actually beyond the countries represented in PACITA and even beyond EU 28. Slight over-representation of people from the research community, but I will come back to that because it's actually very diverse community, but we also managed to get some policymakers, policy advisors, people from industry, CSOs, and media or communication. And it's important to say that a lot of those participants actually had what I call double heads. They were scientists and advisors, or they were former politicians now working in CSO. So the roles were not always so clear. And their expectations towards the summer school were, I would say, self-centered on one side and relational on the other, and I will explain this now. So this is a triangle where you usually situate TA in between policy, science and technology, and society. And people coming from those areas had their own interests. I'm quoting here from the motivation letters: improve policymaking, network and progress in the scientific research, or exchange views for civil society. But they also had, let's say, relational expectations towards TA that would help them to have more integrated, more transversal knowledge, or to do knowledge-based policy making or engage in group learning processes. And then also they had relational expectations from, let's say, science to policy, from policy to civil society, from civil society to science, and vice versa. The typical format of the summer school was 3.5 days, a combination of lectures and workshops. The lectures were had theoretical components and were case studies in the theme that was selected, renewable energy or aging society. There was always an introduction to the topic and an introduction to TA, and then how could TA potentially address this topic, framing of the problem in research design, the method toolbox of TA, and communication and impact making. And then the hosts would make a conclusion speech about what they take home as a non-PTA country after all this, and especially also after the lessons from the workshops. For the workshops, we divided the participants into 2 groups, and each of them had to plan and simulate a TA project. We tried to emphasize the diversity of approaches, and they had to do these workshops also according to those main phases: problem definition, research design, methodology, communication, and then they had to present their results at the end of the summer school. What they also got before the summer school in order to prepare themselves was a literature portfolio that included some literature state-of-the-art about technology assessment, a toolkit of methods, and TA or TA-like projects on the topic we were dealing with, renewable energy or aging. So I already said that we divided them in 2 groups that had to do simulation exercise. We made some scripts in order not to forget the main points of every phase, and they got some assignments. Some of those assignments were role-playing, play a politician, play a researcher, play someone from civil society, and so on. The facilitation of our colleagues from IST in Rathenau and NBT in Rathenau was very important for the process. And in this first summer school, we decided to introduce some pressure, some external events. In one group, it was at more or less the end of the project, an MP would come and would try to kind of take ownership of the project, redirect it, ask them to rewrite and reframe their project, and so they had to deal with this independence issue and so on. And the other group actually had to react to a newspaper's article where it was that was saying that the results were biased, and so they also had to react to that and to argue about their independence. In the second summer school, we didn't do that. What they had to do is actually do a plenary presentation, but as if they were presenting the project in front of a board. They had to defend the project in order to have it funded or agreed. The evaluation, that was a questionnaire given to all the participants, and then the external evaluator of the PACITA project came up with some evaluation. It was overall ranked good to excellent. The first summer school was good on nearly all indicators, but there was room for further improvement. For the second summer school, we tried to do that, and we tried to increase the link between the content and the practice in terms of the literature provided, the lectures, the workshops, and the examples. Some minor critiques by less than a fifth of the participants, but then maybe not everyone could get equally heard. The relevance and the skills of the knowledge that was transmitted, and the representativeness of range of techniques. We can maybe come back to that later in the discussion. The observations, we can say that the summer schools contributed to strengthen the support base of TA. They raised awareness for existing TA institutions and their work. They contributed to identify the needs for TA and rendered it more concrete for the organization of the countries that are not so familiar with it. They created interest in other TA and PACITA activities. We've actually seen a lot of people that attended the summer schools that we then saw in practitioner trainings or saw in the conference or other activities. And then, as I said, they also had their own agenda, their own relational and own expectations, and so it was an opportunity for them to network. But I would say that the most important lesson from the summer schools is that it contributed to build a TA community, a support base beyond the practitioners. The TA community needs to go beyond the practitioners, and I think the summer schools contributed to that. And it distributed capacity to frame issues in terms coherent with TA framework and TA tools by gaining new insight and perspective on great challenges, by incorporating them in their zone of influence for technology governance, and the fact that TA knowledge is co-produced also by the users in a multi-actor process was taken into account. Some broader considerations, I will mainly talk about, let's say, the challenges. As you could see in the figures, there was a slightly over-representation of the science and technology community in the summer schools, although it's not only them, the users of TA. But these were, of course, a very diverse group, and we've already seen in Michael Decker's talk that there is also an issue of interdisciplinarity between the scientists and technologists and engineers. Then also some target groups may need different formats, different incentives, different strategies. I'm especially thinking about the policymakers, where coming to an event for 3 days is a lot of investment for them. And also the name summer school somehow recalled something academic. The fact also that we asked them to write motivation letters, some would not play that game actually. Then being relevant to all the different target groups, we've seen in evaluation that some were questioning the relevance of the skills and if they're really new to them. This is very difficult if you deal with such different target groups, I would say. And then besides our intentions to differentiate the summer schools and the practitioners training, in the reality we noticed that the boundaries were a bit blurry, that people were attending both. But it's nothing we can really do something about. And then maybe talk a bit about simulation and role-playing and their limits. I was recently at a conference where we were talking about aging, and maybe it's very striking area where limitation, role-playing and simulation has its limits. You cannot simulate being incontinent, for example. There was one example project about chronic illnesses in a hospital environment. This is something that is at some point really difficult to simulate. And then also the issue about context. We had some groups that were saying choosing a city or region or a country where they were doing their example, their simulation, and other was so decontextualized that it was a bit out of the blue sky. And maybe the last consideration, and this is probably true for all of us, is how to continue these experiments within let's say, a project funding framework. You can also read a bit more about the summer schools in the upcoming book on TA. Thank you.